I cut the steak into neat slices, watching Jessica out of the corner of my eye. She was sitting across from me at the dining room table, holding her fork gracefully and occasionally glancing around. Her gaze wasn't idly curious, but studied. It was a professional habit that made me notice such details. "Papa Mitch," she said to me in her honeyed voice, "why don't you use the alarm so often?" I noticed that the panel at the entrance almost never blinked. Kyle put the knife aside and grinned. "Jess, my father was a police officer for 30 years. He's his own security, too." I nodded, continuing to chew on the meat. Jessica smiled, but her eyes continued to study the interior of the dining room. For the third time that evening, she looked at the antique sideboard against the wall as if assessing its value. Then her gaze moved to the crystal chandelier above the table, then to the paintings in heavy gilded frames. It all seemed like an unobtrusive inventory. "It's amazing," she continued, "that you live in such a big house all by yourself. Isn't it frightening?" "I'm used to it," I answered briefly. After Margaret died, it had seemed too quiet, but now I liked the peace. Jessica nodded with an understanding that seemed a little too feigned. She was beautiful. There was no denying that. Long brown hair, expressive brown eyes, a chiseled figure. But beauty is no reason to let your guard down, especially when you see the eyes of others assessing your possessions. "Do you keep any valuables at home?" she asked as if in passing. "I mean, family heirlooms, pictures from the war, maybe some collections?" Kyle grimaced. "Jess, what kind of weird question is that?" "Nothing weird," she answered quickly. "I'm just interested in family history. It's important to me to know where we come from." I took a sip of red wine and looked at her more closely. In the 2 years I'd known her, she'd never shown any interest in family history, but she'd reacted very vividly to any mention of my pension or real estate. When I mentioned that I'd inherited the house from my parents and that it was now worth a decent amount, her eyes lit up with unhealthy interest. "I keep a few things," I said vaguely, "mostly in the study." Her gaze shifted momentarily to the hallway leading to my office, the quick, evaluating gaze of someone who's calculating distances and possibilities. I noticed her mentally measuring the number of steps from the stairs to the office door. I remembered that day 2 years ago when Kyle first brought her home. They'd met at the athletic club where she worked as a personal trainer. Kyle was rehabilitating from a back injury sustained on a construction site at the time. Jessica was attentive and caring, helping him recover from an unfortunate fall from scaffolding. She prepared a special exercise program, monitored his diet, even came home to supervise the implementation of the doctor's recommendations. That first evening, she made a pleasant impression on me, a cheerful, outgoing girl of 27 who was genuinely interested in Kyle's work and his future plans. My son was glowing with happiness, and I was happy for him. After his divorce from his first wife, he'd been alone for a long time, focusing on his work at the construction company he'd founded with his partner. But even then, I noticed a few oddities in Jessica's behavior. Too many questions about my police service, the size of my pension, what I was doing with the money. Too much interest in the furnishings of the house, especially the expensive things. She scrutinized the antiques in the living room, asking about the provenance of paintings, wondering if I collected anything of value. "Kyle tells me you have service awards," she continued now, cutting off a bite of potato. "Center must be very valuable, and there must be medals too. Not so much that anyone would want to steal them." I grinned. She laughed a little too loudly. "Oh, come on, Papa Mitch. I'm not talking about stealing. It's just interesting to see real police honors. My uncle was in the army, but he lost his medals when he moved." I continued eating in silence, reflecting on how little her behavior had changed in these 2 years. At first, I'd written off her curiosity as a natural desire to get to know her husband's family better, but gradually I realized that the interest was too practical. She always knew when I received my pension, inquired about my spending, hinted several times that it would be a good idea to open a joint family account. Kyle, meanwhile, was talking about his company's new project, the renovation of an old hotel in downtown Ocean City. The client had offered a substantial sum of money, and the work was to begin in a month. Jessica listened, half listening, nodding and making encouraging remarks from time to time. But I could see that her attention was focused not on her husband's words, but on the surrounding space. "What kind of safe do you have?" she asked, interrupting Kyle's monologue about building materials. A big one? There was a pause. Kyle looked at his wife in surprise, and I set my fork aside and scrutinized her face. Why do you need to know that? My son asked. Jessica blushed slightly but quickly pulled herself together. Well, we're family now. If something happened to Daddy Mitch, someone would know where the important documents were kept. A will, insurance, bank records. Makes sense. Too logical for a spontaneous question. Just a regular home safe, I answered. Nothing special. And you're the only one who knows the code, she persisted. Jess, Kyle was outraged. What kind of interrogation is this? I'm sorry, honey, she said quickly. I'm just worried. My grandfather died suddenly, and my grandmother couldn't find his will for months afterward. I don't want the same thing to happen to us. The story sounded plausible, but I remembered her stories about her family. Her grandfather had died when she was 5, and he had no will. Just a simple laborer who had rented an apartment all his life. Besides, she'd never shown any concern for my papers or will before. Where exactly is the safe? She continued. In the study. Now Kyle was getting suspicious. He looked at his wife carefully, as if noticing for the first time the strangeness of her questions. Jessica, is it really that important to you? Of course I care, she said, but there was a hint of irritation in her voice. Or do you think I don't have a right to know what's going on in our family? I finished my wine and got up from the table. Thank you for dinner, children. I should get some rest. Already? Kyle wondered. It's not even 9 o'clock yet. Sodrum. Age, I shrugged. After 70, your body needs more sleep, and the blood pressure pills are like sleeping pills. That was a half-truth. I did take the pills, but they didn't make me drowsy. I just needed time to think about my sister-in-law's strange behavior and decide what to do next. Jessica escorted me with a look as I walked toward the stairs to the second floor. I could feel that gaze in the back of my head, scrutinizing, assessing, like she was memorizing my movements, my gait, the time it would take me to get upstairs. When I turned around in the middle of the stairs to say goodnight, she quickly averted her eyes and began clearing the table. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and replayed the entire dinner conversation in my head one more time. Too many coincidences, too many leading questions, and this morbid interest in the contents of my safe. As I lay in bed, my thoughts involuntarily drifted back to the day 18 months ago when Kyle had announced his engagement. He was beaming with happiness as he showed me a picture of the engagement ring on his phone. Jessica hadn't chosen the most expensive one, but it wasn't cheap either. Something in the middle, reasonable. That seemed like a good sign to me at the time. The girl is not chasing luxury, I thought at the time. The wedding took place 6 months later in a small restaurant on the ocean. Jessica insisted on a modest ceremony, saying that she did not want to spend extra money on a lavish celebration. That's a wise stance for a young family. I even considered helping with the cost, but she absolutely refused. Daddy Mitch, we can handle it, she said as she hugged me after the ceremony. The important thing is that you've blessed our union. The guests were mostly from Kyle's side of the family, his co-workers, a few old friends, a couple of distant relatives. Only her mother and sister came from Jessica's side. She didn't have a father. He died when she was 16. Her mother worked as a department store clerk. Her sister was in college studying accounting. A simple working family. No pretensions to high status. During the banquet, Jessica was the perfect bride. She thanked the guests for their gifts, listened attentively to stories about Kyle's youth, laughed at my old police anecdotes. When one of her son's friends asked where they planned to live, she said without hesitation that they would rent a small apartment. I don't want to be a burden on Mitch's dad, she said, smiling across the table at me. He has his own life, his own habits. It seemed tactful and right to me at the time. But within a month of the wedding, things began to change. Kyle complained that rent was eating up a significant portion of the family budget. Jessica tactfully hinted that it would be wise to live in her parents' house for at least 6 months to save up for a down payment on their own place. Honey. It's a big house, Daddy Mitch, she said as she helped me wash the dishes after Sunday dinner. And you live in it all by yourself. Isn't it better to have voices in the house, laughter? Makes sense. After Margaret died, the house did seem too big and empty. I agreed to a temporary cohabitation, emphasizing that it was only until the young ones got back on their feet. Things went smoothly for the first few weeks. Jessica turned out to be a good hostess. She cooked, cleaned, and kept order. She did not interfere with my daily routine, did not impose her habits. When I watched the news in the evening or read the newspaper in the living room, she quietly went about her business. The young ones didn't throw noisy parties or play loud music. Perfect neighbors. But gradually I began to notice details that at first seemed harmless. Jessica took a keen interest in my financial affairs. When the mail came, she was always there, seemingly by accident. Several times I noticed her scrutinizing envelopes from the bank or pension fund. "I wonder how much police pensioners are paid now," she once said over breakfast. "Probably a lot, considering your seniority and rank." Kyle choked on his coffee. "Jess, this is none of your business." "Why wouldn't it be?" she wondered. "We're family. I'm just wondering if Daddy Mitch is getting enough to live on, if he needs our help. Tactful and considerate. But why does she need to know the size of my pension if she's offering to help?" Another time she wondered if it was hard for me to maintain such a big house. Utility bills must be pretty high, right? And the property taxes are not insignificant either. I answered evasively, but I noticed how attentively she listened to my answer. It was like she was calculating something in her mind. After a couple months of living together, Jessica began to cautiously inquire about my habits. What time I usually went to bed, when I got up, where I went in the morning. She inquired about my health, asked what medications I was taking, if I was suffering from insomnia. "At your age, it is important to follow the regimen," she said with ostentatious care, "and be sure to take vitamins. I have a great complex, very helpful for stress and insomnia." I thanked but did not take vitamins. Something in her persistence was alarming. After another month, she began to show interest in the layout of the house. Under the pretext of cleaning, she studied all the rooms, including my office on the first floor. She was especially attentive to the bookshelves, the desk, the built-in cabinets. "You have such an interesting library, Papa Mitch," she said, running her finger along the spines of the books. "Lots of crime books. What are those folders on the top shelf?" "Old cases," I answered. "I've kept a few particularly interesting cases." "There must be a lot of interesting stuff in there," she said. "Perhaps you will tell me someday." But her eyes were fixed not on the case files, but on the massive safe in the corner of the office. She looked at it with an expression as if trying to guess what was inside. "What's that for?" she asked, nodding at the safe. "I'm storing documents," I answered briefly. "Valuable papers, wills, insurance policies." "Probably something else too?" she persisted. "I've heard that many police officers collect something related to their service." I shrugged, but noticed that she had memorized the make and model of the safe. A few days later, I found her in her office with a rag in her hands, supposedly dusting. But the rag was on the desk, and Jessica was scrutinizing the lock of the safe. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw me at the door. "I just wanted to clean up. Do you mind?" Of course I don't mind," I said. "Thanks for your concern." But from that day on, I started locking my office when I left the house. I explained it by the fact that there are confidential documents stored there, which should not fall into the wrong hands. Jessica took it calmly, but I noticed a slight annoyance in her eyes. Over the past few months, her interest in my finances had become even more overt. She'd hinted several times that it might be a good idea to pool family resources. "You spend money on us anyway, Papa Mitch," she said. "Buying groceries, paying the electric bill. Wouldn't it be easier to open a joint family account?" I told her I was used to handling my own finances, but I could see how that annoyed her. And recently, she's been even more insistent about my schedule. She found out that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to the doctor for routine checkups. On Wednesdays, I meet with former colleagues in the Veterans Club. I found out what time I usually shower, when I read before bed, if I sleep soundly. "What if you get sick at night?" she asked with ostensible concern. "We might not hear. Our bedroom is on the second floor, and yours is upstairs but in another wing." A logical concern. But why did she ask if I was taking sleeping pills? Now, lying in bed and analyzing all those months, I realized that Jessica had gradually and methodically studied my habits, financial situation, and daily routine. She'd done it discreetly, disguising it as concern and family interest. But the purpose was quite obvious. Over the next few weeks, I watched Jessica's behavior more closely. 30 years of detective work had taught me to notice things that ordinary people overlook. Small details, slight changes in behavior, unnatural pauses in conversation, all of it added up to a picture I didn't like. Jessica was really studying my habits, and she was doing it systematically. When I read the morning news over breakfast, she always found an excuse to be present in the kitchen, ostensibly making coffee or wiping down the countertops, but really keeping track of what time I got up, what I ate, how much time I spent reading the newspaper. Daddy Mitch, do you always read the paper at this exact time? She asked me one morning as I flipped through the pages of the local news. Habit, I answered, not looking up from the text. After the service, I got used to the regime. Do you read in the evening, too? Sometimes. Depends on my mood and fatigue. She nodded and continued wiping the already clean cups, but I could see she was memorizing every word I said. Another time she asked about my evening habits more directly. Kyle says you go to bed early. Is it because of your age or is it just more comfortable? After 70, my body needs more rest, I replied with the standard phrase, and the medications are relaxing. Her eyes sparkled with interest. What medications are you taking? Maybe I should go to another doctor, find something less strong. I shrugged. I'm used to these. Blood pressure, heart, tonic. It's a whole bunch of old man's joys. Do they really make you drowsy? They do. Sometimes I fall asleep in the chair before I even get to bed. That wasn't true. The drugs I was taking didn't make me drowsy, but I needed to give Jessica the impression that I was getting lethargic and inattentive in the evenings. A few days after this conversation, I noticed that she was even more attentive to my evening behavior. When we were all sitting in the living room after dinner, she would furtively watch me, noting the slightest signs of fatigue. Then I decided to start a little play. At dinner, I began to complain of fatigue, yawning, rubbing my eyes. After 8 p.m., I pretended that I could hardly keep my eyes open. A few times, I even dozed off in the chair with a book in my hand so Kyle and Jessica could see it. Dad, maybe you should see a doctor. Worried son. You're getting tired too soon. No, I'm fine, I replied, struggling to get out of the chair. It's just that the pills are stronger than before. I guess my body's more sensitive. Jessica listened attentively to these conversations, and each time she asked me questions about what time I took the pills, how quickly they worked, whether I woke up at night. What if there is noise in the house? She asked me one day. Would you wake up? I don't think so, I answered. I sleep like a dead man. I didn't even hear the thunderstorm last night. There was no thunderstorm, but I wanted to plant the idea in her mind that I was helpless at night. Gradually, Jessica began to take an interest in the layout of the house at night. She found out that my office was on the first floor, at the opposite end from the stairs. Kyle's bedroom and hers was on the second floor, above the living room. My room was also upstairs, but in a different wing of the house. It's an odd layout, she said. It's like the study is completely isolated from the living quarters. That was the plan, I explained. When I was still working, I often had to do things at home. The office is out of the way. You don't disturb anyone. What do you do there now? I read, correspond with former colleagues, sort out old documents. Do you go in there often? Depends on my mood. Sometimes every day, sometimes I don't show up for weeks. She nodded, but I could see she was memorizing every detail. At this time, I began to notice other oddities in her behavior. Jessica began to find excuses to walk past my office too often. She needed to take the trash out the back door or water the flowers on the patio. Each time, she would slow her step outside the office, listening to see if I was there. One evening, I decided to test her reaction. After dinner, I announced that I was going into the study to do some paperwork. Half an hour later, I turned up the music and quietly left the study through the back door, which led directly into the garden. Walked around the house and went up to my bedroom through the main entrance. The study was clearly visible from the bedroom window. I turned out the light and watched. 10 minutes later, Jessica appeared in the first floor hallway. She slowly approached the study door, put her ear to the panel, listened. The music was still playing, giving the impression that I was inside. Jessica tried turning the doorknob, but the door was locked. Then she pulled something small and shiny out of her pocket. In the dim light of the hallway, I couldn't see for sure, but it looked like a lockpick or a thin metal tool. She fiddled with the lock for a few minutes, but to no avail. The lock was a quality, antique lock, not the kind of lock that was easy to pick. Jessica was clearly frustrated. She put her ear to the door one more time, then quietly stepped back and went upstairs. I waited another half hour, then went downstairs, turned off the music in the study, and went back to my room. This experiment had clarified a lot of things. Jessica wasn't just curious about the contents of the study, she was actively trying to get in. The next day at breakfast, I decided to give her another clue. By the way, I turned to Kyle, could you help me with a new lock for the study? The old one is starting to stick. Jessica instantly looked up from her plate. Why change it? She asked. Why don't you just grease it? No, it's all worn out. I'm going to put in an electronic one with a code lock. It'll be more reliable. Electronic? She asked, trying to hide her anxiety. But if you forget the code, I won't. I'll use a memorable date. Which one? She asked quickly. Kyle glanced at his wife. Jess, this is none of your business. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I just thought that if something happened to Daddy Mitch, someone would know the code. I grinned. Nothing's going to happen to me, and if it does, it's all spelled out in the will. After breakfast, Jessica disappeared for a few hours. She came back with some groceries from the drugstore. Daddy Mitch, I bought you some new vitamins, she said, handing me a jar of pills. They're very good, natural. They help with insomnia and calm your nerves. I took the jar and scrutinized the label. It was just the usual B vitamins, nothing suspicious. But why did she need to buy me sleeping pills when I was already complaining of drowsiness from regular medications? Thank you, dear, I said. Very thoughtful of you. I took one pill and swallowed it demonstratively with water. Jessica smiled satisfied. Second, take 2 pills before going to bed, she advised. The effect will be better. Of course it would. I took the jar to my bedroom, but I wasn't going to take the vitamins. I needed to stay alert, not become a sleeping target. That night, I made another spectacle of myself. I took the pills in front of Jessica, then sat in the living room, gradually showing more and more sleepiness, yawning, nodding my head, struggling to hold the book in my hands. I'm feeling particularly sleepy today, I muttered. The new vitamins must be working. Jessica and Kyle looked at each other. Maybe we should go straight to bed, my son suggested. I guess so, I agreed, struggling to get out of the chair. Good night, kids. I turned on the light in my room, then turned it off after 15 minutes. To the observer below, it must have looked as if I had gone to bed. In fact, I sat down in a chair by the window and waited. Around midnight, the house became completely quiet. Kyle and Jessica had apparently gone to bed too. I continued to sit in the dark, listening for every sound. The next day, I went downtown to see an old acquaintance named Kramer. 20 years ago, he had worked as a technician in our department, installing listening devices and hidden cameras for operational activities. After he retired, he opened a small shop where he repaired electronics and made special devices for private investigators. Mitch! He was happy to see me in the doorway of his shop. How many years? How many winters? What brings the old wolf to my den? Danny Kramer was 10 years younger than I was, but he looked much worse. His gray hair was sticking out in all directions, his glasses were thick on his nose, and his hands were always stained with machine oil. But his brain worked like a Swiss watch when it came to electronics. I need your help, Dan, I said, looking around the wired and chip-laden workshop. It's a delicate matter. Are you back in action? He grinned. Awkward. Or a private investigator? Domestic problems, I answered briefly. I suspect someone is planning to rob my safe. Kramer put the soldering iron aside and looked at me carefully. Really? Can't you go to the police? There's no direct evidence yet, just suspicion. I see. What do you want? I took out a folded piece of paper with a blueprint from my pocket. I want a device that will trigger when the safe is open. It should lock the door of the room from the inside and send a signal to my phone. Kramer studied the schematic, scratched the back of his head. It's an interesting problem. Locking the door is not difficult. A simple electromagnetic lock, powered by a battery. But with a safe is more difficult. What model do you have? Old Mosler, mechanical lock, heavy door. Then you could put in a vibration sensor or a magnetic contact. When the door opens, the whole system goes off. We discussed the details. The device had to be compact, silent, and reliable. Kramer suggested using an infrared illuminated mini camera to record the face of the person who opens the safe. "Why lock the door?" he asked. "Wouldn't it be easier to just videotape the whole thing?" "I want to catch the thief red-handed," I explained, "so he can't run away and deny his guilt." Kramer nodded understandingly. "Give me 3 days. I'll put it all together in one case, set it up, and test it. How much will it cost?" "For an old friend cost price, $300. I left him a deposit and went home. Jessica met me in the hallway with a worried look on her face. "Daddy Mitch, where have you been?" "We were worried." "At the doctor's office," I lied. "A routine checkup had gotten delayed. And Kyle called your cell phone, but you didn't answer." "Sharira, my battery died," I shrugged. "I forgot to charge it this morning." She accepted the explanation, but I could tell that my answer didn't really convince her. Apparently, she'd been following my movements. That evening at dinner, Jessica returned to the subject of my health. "You look tired, Papa Mitch. Maybe I should increase my vitamins." "Not really," I replied. "I'm sleeping like a madman. I'm afraid if I take more, I won't wake up at all." Kyle laughed. "Dad, you're exaggerating. They're vitamins, not sleeping pills." "There's not much difference for an old body," I argued. "Any substance is more potent." Jessica listened attentively to our conversation. I could see that she was memorizing every word about my imaginary reaction to her vitamins. The next day I left the house again under the pretense of going to the bank. In fact, I went to a construction store where I bought several meters of thin steel cable, a mini drill, and a set of drill bits. I also bought a can of foam and black duct tape. At home, I waited for Kyle to leave for work and Jessica to head to the gym. I had about 3 hours to get the office ready. First, I scrutinized the office door. It was solid oak with heavy hinges and a solid lock. To install the electromagnetic lock, I needed to drill a small hole in the door frame and run wires to a hidden battery. I chose a spot in the top corner of the frame where the hole would be inconspicuous. I carefully drilled a hole 1/2 centimeter in diameter and threaded a thin wire through it. The other end of the wire was fixed under the baseboard and stretched to the back wall of the desk. I placed a small box under the desk where the main unit of Kramer's device would be placed. For now, I put an old cell phone there to keep my eyes away from it in case someone accidentally looked under the desk. The next step was to prepare the safe. My model had a heavy steel door that opened to the left. On the inside of the frame, I found a suitable place to mount the magnetic sensor, a small notch where it would be completely invisible. Using a mini drill, I drilled a tiny hole for the sensor wire. The wire was pulled along the back wall of the safe and led outside through the technological hole for ventilation. The exit point was masked with black duct tape to match the color of the metal. The most difficult thing was to prepare a place for the camera. It had to capture the face of the person who would open the safe, but at the same time remain invisible. I chose a position on the bookshelf opposite the safe, between 2 thick volumes of forensic science. I carefully cut a small hole in the spine of one book for the camera lens. Inside the book, he hollowed out a hollow for the device itself. The wire from the camera ran along the back of the bookshelf to the same control box under the desk. The job took longer than I'd hoped. I'd barely had time to put away my tools and cover the drill marks when the front door opened. "Daddy Mitch!" Jessica's voice came from the hallway. "Are you home?" "In the study," I replied, quickly shoving the drill into my desk drawer. She appeared in the doorway, shopping in hand. "How's it going? What have you been doing?" "Chefhorm." "I've been sorting through old documents," I said, pointing to the folders spread across the desk. "I decided to clean up the archives." Jessica looked around the office with an attentive gaze. I held my breath, afraid that she'd see traces of my work, but everything was tidy enough. "Would you like to help me with dinner?" she offered. "I bought a beautiful fish, and I'll try to cook it according to a new recipe." "Sure," I agreed, getting up from the table. "And hold on. I'll just finish up here and come back." She nodded and left, but I noticed that she took one more careful look around the room before she left. 2 days later, Kramer called to say that the device was ready. I visited him in the evening, when the workshop was already closed. "It's pretty good," he said, showing me a compact black box about the size of a pack of cigarettes. "All the functions work: the sensor on the safe, the door lock, the camera, the signal to the phone. He explained to me in detail how to connect the system and how to use it. The main unit was powered by a lithium battery that would last a month of continuous use. The signal to my phone was transmitted through a mini transmitter with a range of up to half a kilometer. What if someone accidentally hit the sensor on the safe? I asked. I've got that covered, Kramer grinned. There's a 30-second delay. If the safe doesn't open fully within that time, the system shuts down, so an accidental touch won't activate anything. Clever. I thanked my old friend and went home with the precious box. At home, I waited until everyone had gone to bed and went down to the study. Working by the light of a small flashlight, I installed all the components of the system in the prearranged places. I fixed the magnetic sensor in a recess in the frame of the safe, carefully masking it with black putty. I pulled the wire along the already prepared route to the main unit under the desk. I placed the camera in a hollowed-out book on the shelf. It was completely invisible in the dark, but it had an excellent view of the entire area in front of the safe. The door lock was installed in the upper part of the frame, where I drilled a hole in advance. The electromagnet was small but powerful. It could hold a door weighing up to 100 kilograms. I placed the main control unit under the table in a prepared box. All the wires were carefully hidden under the baseboards and behind the furniture. The last step was to set up the mobile app. Kramer wrote a simple program that received signals from the device and sent me notifications. I installed it on my phone and checked the operation. Everything functioned perfectly. When I opened the safe, the system waited 30 seconds, then locked the door and started recording. At the same time, a message with the coordinates and time of triggering came to my phone. Now all I had to do was wait. Jessica was obviously preparing for active actions. It remained to be seen when she would decide to take them. Having set the trap, I waited for the events to unfold. Jessica was clearly preparing for something, but for now she was limited to studying my habits and daily routine. Each evening, I continued my play with vitamins in demonstration of increasing drowsiness from their effect. "These pills work wonders," I said at dinner, rubbing my eyes. I'm sleeping so soundly I can't even hear my own snoring." Kyle laughed at my complaints and Jessica listened intently to every word. Her eyes sparkled with interest when I told her how deeply I slept on her vitamins. "What if something happened in the house?" she asked one evening. "A fire or a break-in?" "I couldn't hear," I said honestly. "I'll have to count on you young people." "It's not very safe," she said. "Maybe we could put an additional alarm in your bedroom." "Why?" I shrugged. "There's hardly any crime in Ocean City, and a fire? What goes around, comes around." Jessica nodded, but I could see she was satisfied with my answer. The more nonchalant I looked, the more confident she felt. A week after setting the trap, the first interesting thing happened. On Wednesday night, as we were all sitting in the living room, Jessica suddenly remembered that she had forgotten to buy milk. "I'll make a quick trip to the store," she said, getting up from the couch. "Kyle, will you come with me?" "Come on, we'll get it tomorrow," he said. The match had just started. There was a soccer game on TV, and Kyle didn't want to miss it. Jessica insisted for a few more minutes, but to no avail. Then she sat back down. But I noticed the slight irritation on her face. Around 9 p.m., I took my vitamins in front of everyone as usual and announced that I was going to bed. "Good night, kids," I said, kissing Kyle on the top of his head. "Don't bother the old man until morning." I went up to my room and turned on the light for 15 minutes, then turned it off. But I didn't go to bed. Instead, I sat in a chair by the window and waited. My instinct told me that something important might happen today. Around 11, the house was quiet. Kyle and Jessica had gone to bed. I continued to sit in the dark, listening for every sound. At 12:30, I heard the quiet creaking of floorboards on the stairs. Someone was cautiously coming downstairs, trying not to make any noise. The sounds were approaching the first floor. I quietly got up from my chair and walked over to the window. The bedroom overlooked the back of the house where the study windows were located. The moon was almost full, and the yard was lit well enough. A few minutes later, I saw a shadow slip along the wall of the house. A figure in dark clothing was slowly approaching the study windows. It was too dark to make out a face, but I could tell from the silhouette that it was Jessica. She approached the office window and carefully peered inside. The room was dark, no one was there. Jessica stood at the window for a few minutes, apparently listening for sounds from the house. Then she went to the back door, which led from the study directly into the garden. She tried the handle and the door was locked. She took something small out of her pocket and fiddled with the lock. The lock on the back door was simple, not like the one on the main entrance to the study. After 5 minutes, Jessica had gotten it right. The door opened quietly and she slipped inside. I held my breath. The trap had only been set on the safe, not the entrance to the office. But I was curious to see exactly what she was going to do. From my bedroom window, I couldn't see what was going on inside the study. But I envisioned a picture of Jessica carefully making her way to the safe in the dark, careful not to snag the furniture or make any noise. About 20 minutes passed. Then the back door of the office opened again, and Jessica stepped outside. She carefully locked the door and just as carefully headed back toward the house. I quickly went back to my chair and pretended to sleep. A few minutes later, I heard quiet footsteps on the stairs. Jessica was going upstairs to her room. In the morning at breakfast, she looked as usual. No sign of a sleepless night or nervousness. She drank her coffee calmly, discussed the day's plans with Kyle, and inquired about my well-being. "How'd you sleep, Daddy Mitch?" she asked with ostentatious concern. "Great," I said. "I slept like a dead man until morning." "That's good. That means the vitamins are really working." Kyle went to work, and I decided to check out the office. Jessica was busy cleaning the second floor at the time. Everything looked normal in the office, but I noticed a few small details. The books on one of the shelves stood a little differently. The desk handle was turned slightly to the right, though I always left it strictly upright. Most importantly, the lock on the safe bore the marks of attempted forced entry. The scratches were barely noticeable, but to an experienced detective's eye, they spoke volumes. Jessica tried to open the safe, but to no avail. Mosler's old mechanical lock was beyond her. I smiled to myself. So last night had been reconnaissance. Jessica had been checking to see if I was a sound sleeper, and at the same time exploring ways to break into the safe. Once she was convinced that she couldn't open it with simple tools, she'd probably start looking for other ways. In the evening of the same day, a revealing dialogue took place. Over dinner, Jessica asked casually, "Daddy Mitch, did you happen to write down the code to the safe somewhere? Just in case?" Kyle choked on his soup. "Jess, you're doing it again. What's the big deal?" She was innocently surprised. "I'm just thinking about safety. If something happened to Daddy Mitch, how would we get to the important documents?" "Nothing's going to happen to me," I reassured her. "And I know the code by heart." "Heartbroken. But memory isn't always reliable at our age," she insisted. "Maybe we should write it on a piece of paper and hide it in a safe place?" "Why?" I shrugged. "The code is simple, a memorable date. I won't forget it." "What date exactly?" Kyle gave his wife a warning look. "Jessica, stop it." "My late wife's birthday," I answered calmly. "April 23rd, 1952nd. Jessica nodded understandingly. "Romantic. You were very fond of Margaret." "I did," I confirmed. "I still do." This conversation explained a lot. Jessica now had the supposed code to the safe. It remained to be seen how she was going to use it. The answer came 2 days later. Friday morning, Kyle said he had to go to a client's house in a neighboring town over the weekend. "So, they want to discuss the details of a new project," he explained. "He might have to stay overnight." "Go," I approved. "Work is more important." "Why don't I come with you?" Jessica suggested. I hadn't been on a trip in a while. Kyle was surprised. "You'd be bored. I'd spend all day discussing construction plans." "It's okay. I'll walk around town, go shopping." But an hour later, she suddenly changed her mind. "You know what, darling? Go alone," she said. "I don't want to leave Mitch's dad alone all weekend. What if he gets sick or something happens?" Kyle was touched by his wife's concern for my health. "You're right," he agreed. "Dad, Jess will watch you." "Thank you, honey," I said to Jessica. "That's very thoughtful of you." She smiled, but I saw a different expression in her eyes. Cold, calculating. The expression of a hunter who'd cornered his prey. Kyle left Saturday morning. All day, Jessica was emphatically caring. Cooked my favorite lunch, brought me the latest newspapers, asked how I was feeling. The perfect daughter-in-law. But I saw how she glanced at her watch from time to time, how she nervously rubbed the edge of her napkin with her fingers, how often she found excuses to pass by the office. In the evening, she brought me my vitamins again. "Don't forget to take a double dose," she advised. "You can afford a good night's sleep on the weekend." I obediently swallowed the pills and went to bed an hour later. But before that, I went into the office and activated the alarm system. Now any tampering with the safe would set off the trap. Going up to my room, I turned on the light for the usual 15 minutes, then turned it off. But I didn't go to sleep, of course. I sat down in a chair by the window and waited. Time stretched slowly. At 12:30, the house became quite quiet. Half an hour later, I heard cautious footsteps on the stairs. It's starting, I thought, checking that my phone was lying nearby and on silent mode. The cautious footsteps on the stairs stopped. Jessica had gone down to the first floor and was now apparently listening to see if there were any sounds coming from my bedroom. I sat motionless in the chair, barely breathing, and strained my hearing to catch the slightest sounds downstairs. There were a few minutes of complete silence. Then there was the barely audible creak of floorboards in the hallway. Jessica was slowly making her way toward the office. I mentally pictured her sneaking around in the dark, careful not to hit the furniture or make the slightest noise. From the bedroom window, I could see the back of the house. After a few minutes, a familiar shadow appeared there. Jessica went to the back door of the study again, apparently thinking this way was safer than the main entrance. She walked to the door and pulled something small from her pocket. Metal glinted in the moonlight. Lock picks or thin tools for opening locks. Jessica had obviously prepared for this operation in advance, perhaps even bought special implements. The lock on the back door was simple, and she'd gotten through it faster than last time. The door opened noiselessly, and my sister-in-law slipped inside the study. I lost sight of her, but I knew the tracking system would now record her every move. A minute passed, another. Jessica was clearly settling into the dark room, getting used to the surroundings and planning her actions. She had been here before, so she knew roughly the layout of the furniture, but in total darkness she had to be careful. I imagined her slowly making her way between the bookshelves to the corner where the safe stood. The hidden camera was probably already on and recording her every move, though the video might not be very good in the dark. But the infrared illumination should provide enough visibility for identification. Time dragged agonizingly slow. I sat in the chair, listening to the silence of the night and waiting for a signal on my phone. I counted the seconds in my mind, trying to understand what exactly was going on in the office. Finally, I heard a quiet metallic sound. Jessica had gotten to the safe and started working on the lock. The sounds were barely audible even in the silence of the night. She was proceeding very carefully. Mosler's old mechanical lock had a code wheel with numbers from 0 to 99. To open it, the correct combination had to be dialed in sequence. Jessica knew the supposed code, my late wife's date of birth. April 23rd, 1952nd. But the problem was that the date could be written in different ways. 23-04-52 or 02-03-04-52 or 23-4-52. The options were numerous, and Jessica had to go through them one by one. The metallic sounds continued, the clicks of a wheel turning, the slight grinding of a mechanism. Jessica patiently tried different combinations, clearly hoping to find the right one. About 20 minutes passed. The sounds in the office became more frequent. Apparently, Jessica was getting nervous and quickening her pace. She realized she didn't have much time and was in a hurry to finish the job before dawn. Suddenly, the metallic sound stopped. There was complete silence. Then there was a quiet but distinctive click, the distinctive sound of a safe lock opening. My heart sped up. Jessica had mastered the code. Now she was opening the heavy steel door of the safe, and in a few seconds, the trap would be triggered. I grabbed my phone and prepared to receive the alarm. The system was set for a 30-second delay after the sensor on the safe was triggered. That was enough time for Jessica to fully open the door and peek inside. The seconds stretched like hours. 15, 20, 25. The phone vibrated in my hand. A message appeared on the screen. Alert. System activated. Time, 2 hours and 37 minutes. It worked. The office door was now locked from the inside. The camera was recording, and Jessica was trapped. But I was in no hurry to go downstairs. I needed to give her time to realize what had happened and try to get out. More sounds came from the office. First, silence. Apparently, Jessica was studying the contents of the safe. Then a soft thud. She was trying to close the safe door. Then a louder knock, clearly from the office door. Jessica tried to get out and found that the door wouldn't open. At first, she must have thought the lock was jammed. The sounds became more intense. She was trying to open the door by force. I imagined her panic. A few minutes ago, she'd felt like the master of the situation. She'd quietly snuck into the office, cracked the safe, gained access to other people's secrets. Now she was trapped in a dark room with no way out. The knocking got even louder. Jessica was obviously trying to break down the door, or at least attract attention. But the study was at the far end of the house, and its walls were thick. Besides, she couldn't yell too loudly. It would mean a full confession of guilt. I waited a few more minutes, savoring her confusion, then got up from the chair and headed for the bedroom exit. It was time to go downstairs and have a personal interaction with the captured thief. As I walked down the stairs, I turned on the hallway light. Now I didn't have to hide the fact that I was awake. I approached the office door and stopped, listening to the sounds inside. The knocking had stopped. Jessica must have heard my footsteps and realized she was caught. Now she was standing outside the door, wondering what to do next. Pretend to be asleep? Try to lie? Or should I just go straight to the explanation? I went to the bookshelf next to the window and pressed a hidden button behind one of the volumes. It was a secret mechanism that opened a secret door in the wall. I'd installed it years ago when I'd planned the study, but I hadn't told anyone of its existence. A narrow panel in the wall slid silently aside, revealing a passage about a meter wide. Behind it was a small corridor that led into the office through a hidden entrance behind a bookcase. I'd made the secret passage for emergencies, if the main entrance to the office was blocked, or if I wanted to get in unnoticed. Right now, it was perfect for my purposes. I squeezed into the narrow corridor and slowly made my way toward the office. I had to move by feel in the total darkness, but I knew the way by heart. After a few meters, I reached the second hidden panel that led to the office. I carefully opened the panel a few centimeters and peered into the office. Jessica was standing with her back to me near the locked door. She was trying to find a way to open it, groping the lock in the door frame for weaknesses. She was holding a small flashlight that gave off a faint light. I could see her profile. Tense, focused. No sign of panic or hysteria. Jessica was trying to solve the problem rationally, like an experienced burglar. A small bag of tools lay on the floor near the safe. There were some papers lying around, apparently the documents she'd taken out of the safe. I grinned to myself. The safe contained only old newspapers and a few unnecessary certificates. No money or valuables were in there. Jessica stepped away from the door and headed for the window. She tried to open the sash, but the office windows were equipped with security bars. Even if she managed to break the glass, it would be impossible to squeeze through. Then she walked over to the desk and began searching the drawers, looking for spare keys to the door or some documents with codes, but nothing useful was there. I watched her actions for a few more minutes, then decided it was time to go on stage. Silently, I opened the hidden panel wider and stepped into the office. "Looking for something specific, dear?" I asked in a calm voice. Jessica jumped with surprise and turned around. In the light of the flashlight, her face was pale and frightened. For a few seconds, she stared at me with wide-open eyes, unable to utter a word. "Papa Mitch," she finally squeezed out. Where did you come from?" "Secret passageway," I explained, pointing to an open panel on the wall. Very handy in a situation like this. Jessica took a quick look around the office, assessing her situation. The main door was blocked, the windows were barred, and I controlled the only exit. She realized she was in a desperate situation. "I can explain everything," she began in a shaky voice. "Of course you can," I agreed. "And you will. But first, let's figure out what you're doing here at 2 in the morning. Jessica stood by the desk, clutching a flashlight in her hand. Her face looked even paler in the faint light, and her eyes darted from me to the open panel in the wall, as if she were trying to figure out what exactly had happened. "So what are you doing here?" I repeated my question, taking a step forward. She took a deep breath, obviously gathering her strength for an answer. "Yeah, I heard a strange sound downstairs," she began in an uncertain voice. "I thought someone was trying to get into the house. I thought I'd check it out." "And that's why you opened my safe?" Jessica blinked, trying to think of a plausible explanation. "I didn't open it. It was already open when I got here. I thought the burglars would—" "Jessica," I interrupted her, shaking my head. 30 years of detective work has taught me the difference between truth and lies. Try again. She lowered her eyes, studying the pattern on the carpet. There was silence for a few seconds. Then she raised her head again and looked me straight in the eye. Her expression had changed from confusion and fear to something hard and calculating. All right, she said in a firmer voice. Let's say I wanted to look in your safe. What of it? Curious, I grinned. At least now you're not pretending to be an innocent sheep. Why pretend? She shrugged. You know everything anyway. I turned on the desk lamp. The bright light filled the office, and the whole picture of what was going on became visible. An open safe with papers scattered around it, a bag of burglary tools, a locked door. Tell me how long you've been planning this operation, I said, sitting down in the chair behind the desk. Jessica stared at me for a few seconds with an assessing gaze, as if deciding whether to continue the game or to speak frankly. From the beginning, she said finally. From the day Kyle brought me to this house. I'm Renee Fontaine. And what exactly were you looking for in the safe? Money, jewelry, securities, the kind of stuff that wealthy retirees usually keep. I nodded with understanding. How did you know I had anything of value? The house is expensive, the furniture is antique, the paintings aren't cheap, she listed, looking around the office. Plus a police pension for 30 years of service. It was logical to assume that I had enough saved up. Logical, I agreed. What were you planning to do with the stolen goods? Jessica hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should answer honestly. Disappear, she said finally. Take the money and leave. Away from Ocean City. And Kyle? What about Kyle? She shrugged. We'd get a divorce in absentia, or I'd just disappear without explanation. The coldness with which she spoke of her husband didn't surprise me. I'd already realized that for Jessica, marrying my son was just a way to get at the family money. So you never loved him? I did. She grinned. What's that about? Kyle's not a bad guy, but he has no ambition. He works construction, makes an average wage, dreams of a simple family life. That's not for me. So you thought it'd be easier to rob his dad? Not rob him, she corrected. To take what Kyle would inherit sooner or later anyway. Just a little early. I shook my head, amazed at her logic. What about the vitamins you gave me? What were they? Just sleeping pills, she said without a trace of embarrassment. Mild, harmless. Just to help you sleep better. I see. Where did you get the tools to break in? The internet, she replied succinctly. You can buy anything nowadays. I got up from my chair and walked over to the safe. The documents scattered around it were really of no value. Old certificates, utility receipts, a couple of unnecessary letters. What do you think of my treasures? I asked ironically. Jessica cast a disgruntled glance at the papers. Where's the real money? Bank records, stocks, bonds. Who says you have any? Samanon. You can't have nothing at all, she argued. This house is worth at least $500,000, plus antiques, plus retirement savings. I got the house from my parents. The antiques are family, and I'm using my pension for current expenses, I explained. I'm sorry to disappoint you. She shook her head incredulously. You're lying. I'm sure the money is hidden in a bank or another safe. Maybe it is, I shrugged. But you'll never know. Jessica looked at me carefully as if she were trying to read my mind. What happens now? She asked. Will you call the police? I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. It depends on how you behave from now on. What do you mean? Tell me the whole truth, about yourself, about your plans, about what you're going to do with Kyle. Jessica thought for a moment, staring out the window. It was starting to get light outside the window. It wouldn't be more than an hour until morning. My name isn't Jessica Morris, she began abruptly. My real name is Jennifer Collins. I'm from Detroit, not Boston, like I told Kyle. Go on. I'm 29 years old, not 27. I didn't work as a trainer at the gym. It was a part-time job. I specialize in wealthy single men. A con artist, in other words. You can call it that if you want, she agreed. I look for men who have money but no family or close relatives. I make relationships with them, and then I take their savings. How many of these victims have you had? Kyle is the fourth, she answered after a pause. Before that, there was Richard from Miami, Stephen from Atlanta, and David from Chicago. What happened to them? Richard committed suicide when he realized he was out of money, she said indifferently. Stephen filed a police report, but he couldn't prove anything. David just accepted the loss. The coldness with which she recounted the fate of her victims struck me. This was not just a fraud, but a real predator, for whom other people's lives had no value. Why did you choose Kyle? I asked. He doesn't fit your description of a wealthy single man. But he has you, she explained, an elderly father with money and real estate. I had planned to marry Kyle, wait for you to die, and get the inheritance. But then I decided not to wait that long. Shuksta. And what made you accelerate your plan? Time, she answered simply. I'm about to turn 30, and games like this are getting harder and harder. I needed to close this project and move on to the next one. I scrutinized her face in the light of the desk lamp. A beautiful young woman who could have had an honest life, a job, a real relationship, but instead chose the path of deceit and fraud. Shuriken. And what were you planning on telling Kyle if the robbery had succeeded? Nothing much. I'd find the break-in in the morning, call the cops, act shocked. Kyle would never suspect me. Maybe, I agreed. He really trusts you. He does, she confirmed with a touch of disdain. Just like everyone else, men are remarkably naive when it comes to beautiful women. Not all of them, I argued. Some can think. Jessica looked at me carefully. Yes, you're smarter than I expected. When did you realize my intentions? Pretty much from the beginning, I admitted. Too many questions about money, too much interest in my habits. To an experienced detective, these were clear signs of preparation for a crime. Then why didn't you stop me sooner? I wanted to catch you red-handed, I explained, so you wouldn't have a chance to deny it. Jessica nodded understandingly. Smart. And this trap with the locked door was your idea too? Yes, especially for you. She grinned, but without much anger. I have to hand it to you. The plan was well thought out. I fell for it like a rookie. The dawn was getting brighter, and the morning light was already streaming in through the study windows. Soon the whole house would be awake, and it would be necessary to decide what to do with the captured rogue. At 7:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of the front door opening. Kyle had returned earlier than planned. Apparently, the meeting with his client had ended sooner than expected, and he decided not to spend the night in a foreign city. Kyle. Dad, Jess, came his voice from the hallway. I'm home. Jessica flinched and looked at me fearfully. She'd been pretty calm up to that point, but her husband's appearance had clearly thrown her off balance. It was one thing to explain herself to me, and quite another to look into the eyes of the man she'd been deceiving for 2 years. What are we going to tell him? She whispered. The truth, I answered briefly. It was time to end this play. Kyle's footsteps sounded on the stairs. He was going up to the second floor to wake his wife and tell her about his trip. After a few minutes, he would find that she wasn't in the bedroom and would start searching around the house. Kyle, I shouted, we're here in the study. The footsteps stopped, then turned and headed toward the first floor. I could hear the bewilderment in my son's voice as he called back. In the study? This early? What are you doing there? I'll explain, I said. Just come down here. Jessica fidgeted nervously with the hem of her nightgown and cast pleading glances in my direction. But I was adamant. Kyle had to know the truth about his wife, no matter how painful it was. The sound of footsteps approached the study. Kyle tried the door and found it locked. Dad, the door's locked, he said, tugging on the knob. What's going on? Wait a minute, I replied, walking over to the hidden locking control panel. I'll open it. I pressed the button to disengage the electromagnetic lock. There was a soft click, and the door slid open. Kyle immediately swung it open and stepped into the office. The first thing he saw was me, standing by the desk in my homemade clothes. Then his gaze shifted to Jessica, who was standing by the open safe in her nightgown with a bag of tools at her feet. Scattered papers lay scattered on the floor, and a flashlight lay on the desk. Kyle silently shifted his gaze from me to his wife and back again for a few seconds, trying to figure out what was going on. Jess, he finally said, confused, what are you doing here? Jessica opened her mouth but couldn't get a word out. All her confidence and composure evaporated at the sight of her husband. Your wife tried to rob my safe, I explained calmly. Kyle laughed a short, nervous laugh. Dad, this is some kind of stupid joke. Jess can't. I can, Jessica interrupted him quietly. I can, and I've tried. His son stopped half speaking and stared at her wide-eyed. What did you say? I said your father was right, she repeated in a firmer voice. I tried to open the safe and steal what was in it. Kyle shook his head as if trying to chase away a bad dream. But why? Why would you want to do that? If you wanted money, you could have asked for... Not money, Kyle, Jessica interrupted him. Everything. Everything your family has. I don't understand. I decided to step in and explain the situation to my son. Sit down, Kyle, I said, pointing to the chair. This is going to be a long conversation. He mechanically lowered himself into the chair, keeping his eyes on his wife. Jessica isn't who she says she is, I began. Her real name is Jennifer Collins. She's from Detroit. She's 29 years old and she's a professional con artist. What? Kyle exhaled. She specializes in men with money, I continued. Before you, she had 3 other victims. Richard, Stephen, and David. All of them she had defrauded and robbed. Kyle turned to his wife. Jess, tell me it's not true. It is true, she replied quietly, not looking up. But why? Why did you choose me? Because you have a father with money and real estate, Jessica explained. I'd planned to marry you, wait for Daddy Mitch to die, and inherit. But then I decided not to wait that long. Kyle's face paled. So, you never loved me? Love is a luxury I can't afford, she replied with a bitter chuckle. What about everything else? Our acquaintance, our wedding, our plans for the future? It was all an act, Jessica admitted. You're a good man, Kyle, but you're not what I need. Kyle was silent for a few minutes, digesting what he'd heard. I could see something important dying in his eyes. Trust, faith in people, the ability to truly love. How long had you been planning this deception? He finally asked. Since day one, she answered honestly. When I saw you at the gym, I knew right away you were the right guy. Right for what? For my goals. You're single, kind, trusting. You have a father with money. It's a perfect combination. And you never once thought about hurting me? Jessica raised her eyes and looked at him. I did, but that doesn't change the case. I can't afford to get sentimental. Kyle got up from his chair and walked over to the window. He stood with his back to us, looking out into the yard. His shoulders shook slightly, whether from anger or grief, I couldn't tell. What would have happened if you had managed to rob the safe? He asked without turning around. I'd disappear, Jessica answered. I'd take the money and leave town. You'd never see me again. Just like that? No explanation? Just like that. Kyle turned to us. What if Dad had died a natural death? Would you have disappeared after the funeral too? Maybe, or stay for a while so as not to arouse suspicion. I see, Kyle said in a low voice. So the whole 2 years were a lie. Not all of it, Jessica countered. There were some moments that were genuine. Which ones, she wondered. When you were sick from your back injury, I really felt sorry for you. You seemed so helpless and alone. Pity? Kyle grinned. The perfect foundation for a marriage. Kyle, shut up, he interrupted sharply. No more lies. I watched the scene with a heavy heart. My son was going through one of the most painful moments of his life, the shattering of all illusions of love and trust. But it was better to know the truth now than to continue living in deception. Dad, Kyle turned to me, how long did you know? I suspected it almost from the beginning, I admitted. There were too many oddities in her behavior, but it wasn't until the last few weeks that I was finally convinced. Why didn't you tell me? Norm. You wouldn't have believed me, I answered honestly. People in love don't heed warnings. I needed irrefutable proof. Kyle nodded understandingly. You're right. I would have assumed you were just jealous or didn't want to let me out of the house. He turned to Jessica again. So what now? What do you plan to do? I don't know, she admitted. I didn't think I'd get caught. I know what you're going to do, Kyle said in a firm voice. You're going to pack your things and get out of this house. Tonight. Kyle, no discussion. I don't want to see you again. Jessica looked at him, then at me. What about the police? She asked. Will you be filing a report? I looked at my son. This was something we had to decide together. I don't know yet, I said. It depends on how you behave. What do you mean? Leave town and don't show up again, I explained. And don't cheat anyone else. Get an honest job. Jessica grinned bitterly. An honest job? At 29? With no education or experience? That's easy to say. That's your problem, Kyle said coldly. You should have thought of that earlier. There was a heavy silence. The morning sun shone brightly into the office, illuminating the whole picture of a broken family and a defeated con artist. The silence dragged on, growing more and more heavy. Jessica stood by the safe, occasionally glancing at Kyle and me, as if trying to find a way to turn the situation in her favor. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Look, she began, addressing both of us at once. I realize what I did was wrong, but let's try to find a reasonable solution. Kyle looked at her incredulously. What kind of solution? I'm willing to make it up to you, Jessica continued. I'll give back everything I would have taken from the safe. I'll work. I'll pay off my debt. You didn't take anything, I interrupted her. There was no money in the safe. Then what's the problem? She was quick to pick up on it. No one was robbed. No one was hurt. Just a botched attempt. Kyle shook his head in bewilderment. Jess, do you seriously think it's just about the money? What else is it about? She was genuinely surprised. Trust, love, 2 years of lies. Jessica shrugged. We can't change the past, but we can build the future differently. What kind of future? I asked. You said you were planning to disappear with the money. I was, she agreed. But now the situation has changed. We can start over. Start over what? Kyle was outraged. Our marriage was based on deception. Many marriages are based on different things, Jessica argued. Money, status, convenience. Love isn't the only reason to be together. I watched her carefully, trying to figure out if she really believed what she was saying or if she was just trying to find a way out of a hopeless situation. Most likely the latter. A professional con artist doesn't give up after the first failure. Jessica, I said calmly, you don't understand the problem. It's not about the money or the failed attempted theft. It's that you lied for 2 years to a man who trusted you. All people lie, she countered. It's just that some do it for survival and others do it for convenience. Maybe, I agreed. Certainly. But there's a difference between a small lie and a complete deception of a person's entire life. Jessica was silent for a few seconds, pondering my words. Then she tried a different approach. Daddy Mitch, you're a reasonable man, she said to me. Think practically. If I leave, Kyle will be alone. He's 32 years old now, and finding a new wife won't be easy. Thank you for caring about my future, Kyle said wryly. I'm serious, she insisted. We could make a deal. I stay here, run the household, take care of the house. In return, I get a roof over my head and security. A business marriage, in other words? I clarified. Why not? She shrugged. A lot of people live like that. Kyle got up from his chair and walked to the window. Jess, do you even hear what you're saying? Are you suggesting I live with a woman who doesn't love me and just tried to rob my father? Love can be developed, she argued, and past mistakes can be corrected. What mistakes? Kyle exploded. You spent 2 years playing a role. Every day, every hour, you lied to my face. Not every hour, she corrected quietly. What difference does it make? Kyle turned to her. You didn't marry me for love. You married me for money. You studied my father's habits so you could rob him. You gave him sleeping pills to make him sleep better. And now you're suggesting we forget about that and move on with our lives? Jessica looked at him carefully, as if trying to assess whether she had any chance of convincing him. What would a divorce do for you? She asked. You'll be alone regretting the time you wasted. And I know you, Kyle. You're not the type to find new relationships easily. Sheku, that's my problem, he said coldly. Maybe we should try to fix what we have. I decided to intervene in the conversation. Jessica, you're missing the point, I said. Trust can't be rebuilt with a simple solution. Kyle will never be able to trust you again. Why not? She wondered. People change. You haven't changed, I countered. Even now you're trying to find a way to stay, to get to our money. Only now you're offering a fair deal instead of stealing. There's nothing wrong with a fair deal. Not if both parties are truly honest, I agreed. But you weren't, and you won't be. Jessica frowned. How do you know that? Because I've spent 30 years studying people, I explained. Cheaters don't change. They may suspend their activities, find new methods, but the essence remains the same. You judge me too harshly. I judge you realistically. Tell me honestly, if you stayed in this house, would you really be able to forget about money and values? Jessica paused for a few seconds, thinking about her answer. I don't know, she finally admitted. Probably not. You see, at least you're honest about that. Kyle moved away from the window and sat back in his chair. Jess, even putting everything else aside, he said in a tired voice, I can't live with a man I don't know. For 2 years I thought I knew you, and it turns out that even your name is a lie. A name is just words, she objected. No, it's a person, a history, a past. I have no idea who you really are. I can tell you. Can I believe you? Kyle asked. After everything that's happened? Jessica pondered his words. For the first time all morning, she looked genuinely confused. Apparently, she was still hoping to find a way to stay, but she was realizing the hopelessness of the situation. So you've made up your mind? She asked in a low voice. No options. None, Kyle replied firmly. What about you, Daddy Mitch? I looked at her carefully. In the morning, she'd been a frightened victim, a cold con artist, a calculating businesswoman. Now she's trying to evoke pity. My opinion is the same as my son's, I said. You need to leave. All right, she nodded after a pause. Let's say I agree to go. But where to? I don't have the money to move. That's your problem, Kyle replied. I'll give you some travel money, I offered. Akon enough to get to any city in the country. That's it? Jessica wondered. After 2 years of marriage. What else? Kyle shrugged. Alimony? Property division? Why not? We're legally married. A marriage entered into under a false name, and for fraudulent purposes, I said, can be declared null and void. Jessica grimaced. That would still have to be proven. With the videotape of your attempted theft, that shouldn't be hard. She fell silent, contemplating her position. All the trump cards were on our side, and she realized it. How much time do I have? She finally asked. Until tonight, Kyle answered. By sunset, I want you out of this house. And personal belongings? Take everything that belongs to you personally. The rest stays here. I see, she nodded. And the wedding presents? I sought. What kind of gifts? The ring, the jewelry you gave me. Kyle thought for a moment. You keep the ring, he said firmly. You can have the rest. Jessica took the wedding ring off her finger and put it on the desk. Here, she said. I don't owe you anything more. Except an apology, I said. For what exactly? She wondered. For trying to survive in any way I could? Sorry, for ruining a good man's life. Jessica looked at Kyle. I'm sorry, she said without much expression. I didn't mean to hurt you. Thank you, he replied dryly. That was very comforting. There was a pause. All the important things had been said, the decisions made. Only the technical details remained. I'm going to go pack, Jessica said, heading for the door. Wait, I stopped her. One more question. She turned around. I'm listening. How are you going to live your life? Are you going to continue to deceive people? Jessica hesitated, looking down at the floor. I don't know, she answered honestly. It's the only thing I know how to do. There are other things you can learn. At 29, I doubt it. It's never too late to start an honest life. She grinned. Beautiful words, Papa Mitch. But honesty is a luxury for those who have a choice. With those words, she walked out of the office, leaving us to deal with the aftermath of the morning's discovery. After Jessica left, Kyle and I were left alone in the office. My son sat in his chair, staring at one point, while I cleaned up the aftermath of the night's incident. I gathered up the scattered documents, closed the safe, and put the burglary tools in a plastic bag in case they were needed as evidence. Dad, Kyle finally broke the silence. Did you really know from the beginning? I suspected, I clarified, sitting down across from him. Too many weird things. But I'd only been sure for the last few weeks. Why didn't you tell me? His voice sounded more tired than reproachful. You wouldn't have believed it. A man in love doesn't hear warnings about the woman he loves. Kyle nodded understandingly. Yeah, you're probably right. I'd think you were just jealous or didn't want to share a house with someone else. Exactly. That's why I had to wait for her to give herself away. How long had you been planning this trap with the locked door? A couple weeks, I answered. When I realized Jessica was studying my daily routine and wondering about the contents of the safe. My son was silent, digesting the information. So she'd been playing the role of the perfect wife for 2 years? She was. I didn't even realize it, Kyle grinned bitterly. I thought I'd been lucky to meet a woman like her. She's a professional, I said. People like that are hard to spot without specialized knowledge. It hurts, Dad. 2 years of my life wasted. Not wasted, I countered. You learned a lesson. Painful, but useful. There were noises coming from the bedroom upstairs Jessica was packing. Occasionally something fell to the floor. Footsteps could be heard across the room. What now? Kyle asked. Divorce? Of course, and the sooner the better. She could ask for alimony or property division. She'll try, I agreed. But we have videotape of her attempted theft. Plus, we can prove that the marriage was entered into under a false name for fraudulent purposes. A videotape? Kyle was surprised. When a hidden camera recorded her every move in the office. Perfect evidence for the court. The sounds upstairs stopped. A few minutes later, Jessica came downstairs with 2 suitcases. She had changed into her traveling clothes and looked ready to leave. I've packed all my things, she announced, peering into the study. You can check it out if you want. I don't need to, Kyle replied without looking up. I need money for the trip, she reminded me. I pulled my wallet out of my pocket and counted the cash. It came to $400. That's enough to get to any city, I said, handing her the bills. Jessica took the money and slipped it into her pocket. Thank you. What about my papers? Passport? Marriage license? We'll get the divorce through a lawyer, Kyle said. The papers will be in the mail. Where exactly will they be mailed? She asked. I don't have a permanent address. That's your problem. Jessica nodded and headed for the exit. She turned around at the door. Kyle, I'm really sorry about what happened. Yeah, I remember, he replied dryly. You already apologized. Not for stealing, for not being able to really love you. Thank you, he said in the same tone. That was very comforting. Jessica sighed and left the house. A few minutes later, we heard the sound of a cab pulling away. Kyle got up from his chair and walked over to the window. He watched the car disappear around the corner. That's it, he said. She's gone. Yeah, I agreed. And thank God. You know what's weird? Kyle turned to me. I don't feel any relief, just emptiness. That's normal. It takes time to process what happened. Do you have any regrets about how it ended? I thought about his question. I felt sorry for my son. He was going through a painful breakup with the woman he thought he loved. But I couldn't regret that we'd gotten rid of the con artist. No, I answered honestly. I don't. It's better to know the truth now than in a few years. You're probably right, Kyle agreed. But it still hurt. It'll pass, I assured him. You're young. You'll find another woman. A real one, not a con artist. I don't know, Dad. It's hard to trust anyone after something like that. I know, but not all women are like Jessica. Jennifer, he corrected. Now we know her real name. Yeah, Jennifer Collins from Detroit. We went back into the living room. Kyle had the TV on, but he was watching absent-mindedly, obviously thinking about something else. I made my way to the kitchen and made coffee. It was easier to process what had happened while doing the usual things. What if she comes back? Kyle asked when I brought him a cup. She won't, I said firmly. It's too risky. We know the truth. We have evidence. What if he tries to blackmail her, threaten a public scandal? With what exactly? I grinned. With a story about how she tried to rob us? She could come up with something else. Let her try. I'm not afraid of a con artist. The rest of the day went smoothly. Kyle called work and said he'd be home late for a family emergency. We had lunch together, talked about future plans, tried not to bring up Jessica. In the evening, I pulled some real valuables out of the safe. Deeds to the house, bank papers, a small collection of gold coins. It was all stored in another stash that Jessica didn't know about. So there really wasn't anything in the safe, Kyle wondered. Just old certificates and newspapers, I confirmed. The real valuables were hidden somewhere else. What if she had found it? She wouldn't. I'm the only one who knows the stash. Can you show me? Of course I will. Now that there are no strangers in the house, there's no need to hide family secrets. I showed my son a hidden safe in the bedroom wall, disguised as an ordinary wall socket. Jessica could live in the house for another 10 years and not know it existed. That's clever, Kyle said. Where'd you learn how to do that? In the service, I had to hide evidence and important documents from criminals. What are we going to do with the videotape now? We keep it, I decided, just in case Jessica changed her mind and tried to come back with any complaints. By late afternoon, we'd cleaned up the house. We removed all traces of Jessica's presence, changed the locks just in case, checked the security system. The house was ours again, a man's retreat. You know, Kyle said over dinner, it's even cozier here. Because there's no tension, I explained. No more watching every word and no more fear of eavesdropping. Yes, she was indeed always prying for information. And now we can relax and live in peace. Late that night, Kyle went to bed. I stayed in my office, rereading the paper and thinking about the previous day. All in all, it had ended for the best. The con artist had been exposed and banished. Family values were protected, and my son had learned a painful but useful lesson. 30 years of detective work have not been in vain. My professional skills and intuition helped me recognize the threat and neutralize it. Jessica proved to be a smart and cautious adversary, but she still lacked experience. Now she's out on the road somewhere, reflecting on her failed attempt and planning her next scam. Hopefully the lesson will do her good and she'll find an honest way to make an honest living. Although, knowing the psychology of such people, I doubt it. The important thing is that my family is safe now. Kyle will survive the divorce and find a woman worthy of him, and I'll continue to live in my house, enjoying the peace and quiet. Turning off the light in the study, I went upstairs to my bedroom. Tomorrow a new life will begin, without lies, without hidden threats, without cheaters. Just the kind of life I need at 73.